Let's
Complimentary lines, rhyming feather climbing as the vines, dynamic
oh, there's my degree. Whoever does his credit cards in my mailbox every few months.
Hey, fuck the tripod. I'm just letting you know it needs to be somewhere. Try not to make this too long, but I'm not through the essay yet, but I'm a little too excited for it. Don't really want it to end. It's actually I do. It's an essay by Ivan Illich, this gentleman, very intelligent fellow. It's from the 70s. It's called Useful Unemployment and Its Professional Enemies. And the title's a little bland compared to, in my opinion, compared to the content of this extremely important essay. But the 20th page in or so, Ivan Illich, and I'm still not sure quite why, starts to insist, after his criticism of consumer culture and industrial mass production culture, and the way that it de-skills people, makes them dependent on things that don't require as much competency or self-sufficiency as they once did before commodity goods were the primary source of subsistence, I guess. So basically he's talking about the hijacking of subsistence, the ability in particular of local communities to subsist more or less on their own in trading relations with others that allows them to basically kind of a survival advantage to not be completely beholden to, say, the electrical system. You've heard it all before. There's lots of movements that try to break out of it, but it seems to still be getting worse in terms of weaponry, and that's where we get to this part where he says, if an argument constructed around these notions were valid, these notions being that the security state or the military bureaucracy or the police state, he's dating that back to Louis XIV or so. The idea he's rejecting, Illich is rejecting here, is that the police state is behind the economic structure of society in a way that it creates what he calls modern impoverishment, which is that, your standard of living, so-called, can be really high in terms of the amount of commodities you're able to consume or purchase or whatever. Things that you can own or think that you own. The idea that that's all organized by the military is wrong for Illich. Not all organized by it, but rather this kind of primarily driven by it or structured by it, more so than it is structured by maybe presumably other forces in society other than the military, the police, and he includes propaganda there for them. He says here, since Hiroshima, going up a little bit, since Hiroshima, the so-called services, security services, appear to be the determinants for research, design, production, and employment. MIT is a good example. The weapons industry in relation, and the mining resource industries in relation to the universities and think tanks and so on. Other examples of that all over the place. Medical sciences, blah blah, psychology. Hi Jordan, I hope you're doing okay. I'm really worried about you. Just lay off the side or slam back 3 liters of it and see if it just breaks you through the other side. Anyways, where were we? They rest upon civilian foundations, such as schooling for discipline, consumer training for the enjoyment of waste. I really love that phrase that he makes there, consumer training for the enjoyment of waste, to somehow convince a culture that it's enjoyable to produce so much waste. Canada, by the way, does produce, I keep repeating this because I think it's important, a recent study says that Canada produces more waste per capita than any other state on earth. Okay, so habituation to violent speeds. There you go. How many other people were almost killed by a car today because they thought you were about to get across the street because you're almost there, so they shouldn't just slice into you right next to you because they're in such a rush on Sunday, whatever, afternoon, one person in a fucking car. where are your friends? One people, car people. What are you doing that's so important? I mean, go to work, fine, whatever. You hate your job, fine, I'm sympathetic. But all that other shit. Violent. Anyways, habituation of violent speeds. Medical engineering for life in a worldwide shelter. I'm calling camp capitalism, maybe. Global camp capitalism. Or encampment. And standardized dependence on rations dispensed by benevolent quartermasters. This line of thought. Ever notice how the grocery stores are starting to look more like, fortified warehouses for wares that only maybe certain people can get into, and maybe they'll have some security guards and stuff next to their automatic beepers, whatever. Looking more and more like airports. It's really disturbing. People are running around like chickens with their head cut off. It's unfortunate. This line of thought sees state security as the generator of a society's production patterns. I want to make something close to that claim in my dissertation, but I don't think I would say it is the generator. It's got to be something more precise than that. Maybe less sweeping. The generator. Maybe the main, primary, whatever, like the most prevalent generator, maybe, of a society's production patterns. I wouldn't say it's the generator. And even the word generator I don't really like, because I want to take that back from the sort of motor generator to, generativity, the genos and the creativity of mutual aid cooperation in pretty much every single animal species, except for humans, apparently, who like to kill each other for really stupid reasons, because their so-called standard of living is going down. They need someone to blame while they drive around their fucking cars that are built on genocidal warfare and kill more than 1.25 million people per year, which is more than Auschwitz killed in 4 years, also known as the Holocaust. Fucking car people. It's disgusting. It's murderous, anyways. My hands aren't fucking clean either. I'm not saying that. I drove a truck around the tundra for 3 years straight, 12 hours a day. So, trying to throw me with that self-righteous crew. You're so self-righteous. I'm just fucking speaking at conscience, okay? Sartre once said that the philosopher is the bad conscience of their time. See, I'm just trying to do my fucking job, so, keep those paychecks coming, George. Soros, come on. $5. You got more than that, George, come on. George Soros, such a cheapskate, that guy. Okay. If an argument, not as cheap as a bull, though, alright, we won't get into that, but we invented pierogies, just don't forget. Now, this is where Illich tries to twist the knife here, and I just don't see what his argument is, how it works here. I think he's straw-manning the, what would you call it, the person who, the theoretician who claims that the military is the primary generator of the economic exploitative order, because the way that domination works is through concentrated violent power. I don't want to call it violent power, actually, or say violent power is force, and violent power isn't really power. It is disempowering, and it, sort of a weaponization of impotence, of isolation, fear, all these things that are not powerful at all. They're actually diminishments of anything that you could call power, and usually, utterly self-destructive in the long run, at least, or in the short term. 12-year, 1,000-year reich, every one of those. If an argument, Illich continues, constructed around these notions were valid, how could such a society forego atomic power, no matter how poisonous, oppressive, or counterproductive a further energy glut might be? So how could they forego it if the military was the social sector structuring the economy? I think Illich is strawmanning here, because he's saying, it seems to be that he's saying only the extreme case is the one he's considering, where the military structures everything through and through, which means, like I've been saying for a long time, is if human beings were Homo genicidae, or like genocidal animal, like essentially, or something, and genocide or violence cut to the core of our being, or whatever species being, the way that it makes no sense. We'd be dead by now. That's what he's saying. That if it was just Hobbesian war of all against all in our species, for some reason not the other ones that seem to cooperate, for the most part, just fine, other than the predatorial stuff. That's different species, right? So humans, they're setting upon their own species still, members of their own species, on these bankrupt, like, ridiculous ideologies about them not being as human or as good morally or something while we bomb them. Well, anyways, yeah, so if genocide all the way down, as it were, not only would it be an ethical duty to kill yourself, which I'd like to hope isn't, because it's an unlivable worldview to have, or ethical view, rather. Either it's ethical to kill yourself, or it's the only ethical thing to do if you're committing genocide, essentially, in every respect. And a creature like that doesn't even make sense, is the more profound problem with this, because there's no way such a thing could evolve or survive. We have dependency on cooperation to live like any other species. So he's Illich is straw manning the camp capitalist position, or anti-camp capitalist. I mean, the camp capitalist analysis, I should say, with the gun standard. I'm calling it like the military might, the concentrated power. I think Tolstoy is sort of in agreement with this. He says in The Kingdom of God is Within You, his anarchist Christian work of political theory. He calls it the military contradiction of mankind. It's a military contradiction of humankind. It's a disturbing passage, he says. If any person or whatever, human being, personality, I'm trying to distinguish those two, I keep forgetting person and personality. If any human being truly gazed into the abyss that is the military contradiction of humankind, to give it a Nietzschean swing. It's not a direct, like, an exact quote, but if anyone were to really comprehend this or see it in its full horror, they would kill themselves immediately. That was Tolstoy saying that. And Tolstoy's no slouch when it comes to confronting really horrifying subjects. And he says, if you really confronted this military conflict that humanity finds itself in, it would be suicidal despair, a recipe for suicidal destruction. It's something to think about. So I think Tolstoy, in his story, the military is really pretty much at the center. It doesn't mean it's the only thing determining this degenerate violence that still pervades our condition as human beings. Where was I here? He says, how could a defense-ridden state, so a pervasively militarized state, which I don't think you have to say anyways, how could that kind of state be expected to tolerate the organization of disaffected citizen groups who unplug their neighborhoods from consumption to claim the liberty to small-scale, use-value intensive production that happens in an atmosphere of satisfying and joyful austerity? Like a little Diogenes-style cynical commune where you don't have much, but people are fine with that and make do on their own outside off the grid, whatever. He says, would not a militarized society soon have to move against need deserters? Need deserters. Commodity. These guys need dessert, right? Ice cream. Ice cream eating motherfuckers, I think is what Guy Pichot called them. Everyone here likes fucking ice cream for some reason. It's like a cult. Brand them as traitors. Yeah, the need deserters, the ice cream deserters. Black traitor. You're judging me self-rightly. I want to eat an ice cream. I'm a polite Canadian. It's like, get over it, okay? Please, or don't, or just fuck off, whatever. Have a nice day. Brand them as traitors, and if possible, expose them not just to scorn, but to ridicule. Would not a defense-driven society have to stamp out those examples that would lead to nonviolent modernity just at the time when public policy calls for a decentralization of commodity production, reminiscent of Mao, and for more rational, equitable, and professionally supervised consumption? See, this is crazy because, not in a good way, because there's that, but in a sort of incoherent way, it's a series of kind of loaded questions, no pun intended. We're talking about defense here. Doesn't pack much of a punch, in my view, because exactly what he says is not, it's hard to say this, or hard to put this the right way, or both. This is what happens to some degree. I mean, a lot of it worse than ridicule or scorn. When it comes to so-called need deserters, countercultural figures, Yeah, marginalized people, dog whistlers, or what do they call it? Whistleblowers, when they're good Diogenes dogs and they express using their freedom of speech some illegal activity or something like this that is dangerous to the whole society, like a Snowden or someone, they are moved against from the military. The military society does move against those people, puts them in jail. Mumia Abu Jamal, Leonard Peltier, these kind of figures, people that really do rock the boat for good causes, and most people would agree. Like MLK, it's like they get sniped out. That is what happens in a military. So the use of this example on Illich's part, I think, is very puzzling to me. Would not a defense-driven society have to stamp out those examples that would lead to nonviolent modernity? That's precisely what they're doing. Dakota Access Pipeline. These are nonviolent people that are staying in the pathway of the means of destruction, or the weaponized means of, like, they're just weapons. They're destructive, not just of the indigenous people, although they're always the guinea pig, the first target almost always, but the after effect is not good for the people that are, or the people's children, grandchildren that are doing it, benefiting in the short term financially from it. It's like, this is happening. So, I mean, that's more a case in favor of the view he's trying to oppose than it is for his own, if he wants to use those examples. He says, this argument pays undue credit to the military as the source of violence in an industrial state. Again, who's saying that the military is the source of violence? That's not a claim that is required. For the view that the gun standard is, say, the primary driver of exploitative economic, modern poverty. Doesn't have to be a source of violence. I think what you're going to have in the source of violence is some really careful or maybe rambunctious and daring attempt to some objections over there from the other dog. Probably not an Illichian. He's probably a Schmittian by the sounds of it. He's pretty loud. Wait, what was I saying again? Oh, yeah. To get to the source of violence, I mean, the source, I would say probably many sources of violence. There's no one way or the other about it. Hasn't been shown either one way or the other yet. But when you get into that, it's a psychological question, I think, more than a question about just the military. What is the military? What is a military? It can't just be a source of violence. There's got to be, it's a violent structure, or whatever. I don't even like the word structure. It's a violent institution. Even so, it's a violent formation by definition, pretty much. Defensive violence, whatever you want to call it. Offensive violence usually is how they are established. So doesn't mean it's the source of violence. It means, well, what was it that led to the establishment of something like a military in the first place? It's some kind of the source of violence. What is that? I mean, it's a mystery. It's got to be like natural in some broad sense, because everything is in nature that we have kind of experience of, I guess. We experience violence. Some sort of collision between sensitivity and force, destructive force or harmful force. Where is that coming from? Let alone so much of it in the form of organized violence, so-called. It's kind of a stretch to call it organized, because any war that has ever been fought, I call it the fog of war for a reason. It's not a stable activity by definition almost. Anyways, he says the assumption that military requirements are to blame for the aggressiveness and destructiveness of advanced industrial society must be exposed as an illusion. Okay, but you haven't shown that yet. So let's see. No doubt, if it were true that the military had somehow usurped the industrial system, again, usurp the industrial system, or is the industrial system just very much a part of the military in a broader sense? What that broader sense is another question, and we can deal with that later, I guess. But still, it's not ruled out. If it had wrenched the various spheres of social endeavor and action away from civilian control, then the present state of militarized politics would have reached a point of no return. Again, what does it look like? $770 billion. I mean, it's not Illich's fault. This is 40 years ago now. The situation has changed in such a way that, as Marx puts it, the truth is historical. And these are important insights for their time, but I think they're outmoded in many ways, and maybe they're inaccurate to begin with. I would like to think that that's true as well in some case here. At least of no potential for civilian reform. All right, so if the military is in control of everything, which is not what we're saying. If it is, though, yeah, there's no reform done by citizens, and there would be no agitation because the military would just crush it right away. Okay. This is, in fact, the argument made by the brightest of Brazil's military leaders, who see the armed forces as the only legitimate tutor of peaceful industrial pursuit during the rest of this century. Okay, that's an old historical thing. Remark. He says, but this is simply not so. The modern industrial state is not a product of the army. Rather, its army is one of the symptoms of its total and consistent orientation. Again, that the army could just be a symptom of modern industrial state is where does this total consistent orientation of the industrial, just turn the question around, how is the industrial state spread, imposed, established, given its so-called consistent orientation, which it never had, but the orientation that it has, when it comes in, think of the Hudson's Bay Company, it's part of an invasion, it's a military activity that sets these things up, that set them up, and still sets them up. There's police involved, there's guns, there's violence, organized violence, militarists, so its army is one of the symptoms of industrial. It's like, they didn't have guns, how would they enforce any of this? This doesn't make sense. Weapons. True, the present industrial mode of organization can be traced to military antecedents in Napoleonic times, okay? Through the compulsory education of peasant boys in the 1830s, the universal health care for the industrial proletariat in the 1850s, the growing communications networks in the 1860s, as well as most forms of industrial standardization, it's called gun standardization, or genocidal standardization, are all strategies first introduced into modern societies as military requirements and only later understood as dignified forms of peaceful civilian progress. But the fact that system and welfare needed a military rationale to be enacted into law does not mean that they were not thoroughly consistent with the basic thrust of industrial development, which in fact was never nonviolent, peaceful, or respectful of people. I'll have to read that again. It sounds like he's starting to talk out of both sides of his mouth, and I don't want to be harsh to Illich. He's one of my favorite authors nowadays. His Deschooling Society makes a lot of sense of my experience of school, despite having a lot of really amazing teachers who I owe amazing, incredible, immeasurable, debt to, spiritually speaking. The schooling system is really not a good thing for learning. It's a good thing for taking people that, maybe like books a lot and are intelligent in that way, and kind of cordoning them off and putting them in a concentration camp to be irrelevant and uncritical towards the kind of madness that prevails, and again, not madness in the good way, but the other kind, outside the school walls, and the bureaucracy is just swallowing that place, and students are getting depressed. It seems like your curricular learning act as it is, it seems more or less in obedience and being stressed out and kind of humiliated. Get ready for your corporate job, kind of training camp. And that's not an education, that's what Ivan Illich would call, some sort of assault on education, a miseducation, or a dumbing down, a discouraging kind of structure for most that go through it. Anyways, on those nice notes here, just a few random thoughts that grew way too long. Just try to make this thing 10 minutes. from Toward a History of Moods. Let's see, it's from 1977, and this is the essay in the collection, Useful Unemployment and Professional Loneliness, written in 1977, published in 1st